Hi guys, I'm Graeme, one of the screen production tutors here at UB Colleges, and today I'm going to be talking you through how you can make your video slow-mo. Alright, so there's a lot of different ways of producing slow motion video. I'm going to show you a few different ways. Some of it requires particular pieces of equipment to do effectively, although those are becoming much more available at lower budgets. But let's start off by looking at something that anybody with a camera and some editing software can do. So the editing software we're going to be using today is Adobe Premiere, but pretty much every piece of editing software out there will be able to do something along the lines with this. But I'll be showing you this because that's what we use at UB. So we have a clip here of another one of our tutors here, Gail. She's having a, clearly having a good day. Let's play this clip down and see what's happening. So this clip was shot at 25 frames per second, which is the standard frame rate for New Zealand video. And it is now playing back in real time. So we're seeing it at the speed that it was recorded. But that's not what we want. What we want is we want it to be moving more slowly than it would in real life. So how can we do that? So what we're going to do is we're going to come down to the clip in the timeline here, and we're going to right-click on it. And on the large pop-up menu that we have here, we're going to select speed/duration. Now, this will bring up this pop-up window here, and we've got a number of options here that will allow us to change either the speed of the clip or the duration. What we're going to do is we want this video to be playing back more slowly, so we're going to change the speed from 100%, which is full speed, to 50%, meaning it's going to play back half as quickly, so it's going to be twice as slow. So we do that and we hit OK, and then you'll notice that the clip has doubled in length. So let's play that back. So you can see that it is playing back more slowly, but it's quite jerky. Like it feels unnatural. It's not that smooth, creamy slow motion that you might see from somebody like the slow-mo guys. But we are limited by what we shot. So let's actually have a look at what's happening here. So when we go frame by frame on this, you'll see my playhead is moving along frame by frame, but it doesn't seem to be changing the picture all the time. So what's happening here is something called frame sampling. And essentially what we've done here is, because we're playing it back twice as slowly, it is actually just playing each frame twice. So each picture that the camera took 25 times per second, it's playing each of those twice to then make it 50 frames per second. So, it does the trick. It's kind of the most basic way that you can make your footage take longer to play back, but it does have a particular look to it. Okay, well, let's have a look at, is there any other options that we could do here using the tools that we have available to us right now? So if we go back into that speed duration menu, down the bottom there's this drop-down selection there. And there are three options in there. So we've already looked at frame sampling. We're going to look at the next one down here called frame blending. So if I select that one, the duration hasn't changed. I haven't changed how long I wanted to play back. All this is going to be doing is changing the way that it tries to process that. So if we look at it now, when we play it back, well, let's have a playback. Okay, so it looks a bit different. It still doesn't feel quite natural, but it feels a bit smoother. Okay, now what's actually happening? Let's do a frame by frame again. So if we have a look at this frame by frame and we look at the images, every image is different. But what's actually happening is we've got, say, the original frame 1 and the original frame 2, and then we've added an extra frame there in the middle. With frame sampling, it was just a repeat of frame 1. Now what's happened is it's taken both of those frames and kind of blended them together. It's overlaid them. So that's a little bit smoother, but it's still not quite as smooth as we want it to be. So let's have a look at the third option. So if we go back into speed duration, the third option that we have is called optical flow. Now, optical flow is the most sophisticated one, and could in theory give you the most satisfactory result. What optical flow is going to be doing, so instead of just repeating the frames or blending the frames, like just overlaying them, it's actually going to be analyzing the frame. So it's going to be looking at frame 1, looking at frame 2, and then trying to invent a frame between those two. So essentially creating an entirely new picture that didn't exist. This can work really, really well. It can work not so well. Let's have a look. Let's play this down. So it doesn't look too bad, actually. It looks pretty smooth. It looks a little bit sort of weird still, but not too bad. Like, definitely an improvement over the previous two. But if we actually go in and look at some of the frames, you can see that there is what's called, or it's glitching out a little bit. So if we have a look at the confetti up in this corner here, it's just not looking particularly good. Now, you're not going to probably be looking at this frame by frame, so it's as long as it looks okay in full motion, then it's okay. So yeah, so if you just have a basic camera, this is a way to capture slow motion. There is absolutely a limit to how far you can push this. Like, I could try and make this go even slower, say 25%, so 4 times slower. But then the computer's going to be having to invent even more frames, and that's when you start throwing in more problems and you'll start seeing more glitches. So the professional way, he says, quote unquote, is to actually be thinking about the slow motion and trying to capture it as slow motion as you film it. Now, not every camera is able to do this. The camera that we're shooting this on has a lot of different frame options. So essentially what we need to do is something known as overcranking. And overcranking is where, instead of filming at 25 frames per second, which is what we did with the last one, we are going to be recording at a higher frame rate. So the first one we're going to be looking at is 50 frames per second. So I'm capturing twice as many images as I would normally. Now, the trick here is that if I recorded for 1 second, I would have 50 pictures, right? That's what the frame rate means, or 50 frames. Let's play it back at 50 just to give you that example. Right? So that's real time. It looks a little bit strange for a couple of reasons we won't get into today, but that's real time. What instead we're going to do is we're going to play this back at 25 frames per second. So we're not trying to invent more frames, we're just playing it back. We're just telling it to play the frames more slowly. Now, the way that you would take a video shot at 50 frames per second and get it to play back correctly is you actually want to rather than changing it on the timeline, we're going to change the clip itself. So in the project bin that we have here, I'm going to right click on this clip here, the 50 frames per second clip, and I'm going to go up to modify, and then I'm going to go to interpret footage. Now, this is essentially you telling the editing software how you want it to handle this piece of footage, because video tends to have certain things baked into it. So how fast to play it back and those is the one that we're interested in today, but various things like that. We can tell the program to, instead of play it back at 50 frames per second, we're going to play it back at 25 frames per second. The difference here is that we have captured every single frame in that process. So when we play this back, it is much more smooth. A lot of cameras can shoot at 50 frames per second, but what if you have a camera that can shoot even more? This particular camera can shoot at 180 frames per second, which is 7.2 times slower than standard 25 frames per second. We have also recorded one of those, so let's have a look at that. Much, much smoother, right? It looks like something is just like time has actually slowed down. It doesn't have that glitchiness. It doesn't have the stutteriness of the other options. It is recorded it to be played back in this fashion. Now, the interesting thing here is that, you can look at this as I can either do it by changing it in post, changing it using the editing software, or we can look at it as shooting it to begin with. However, you can do both. So I could take this already slow footage and then slow it down further. It's exactly the same process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my speed duration and I'm going to make this 50%. So now it's going to be going 14.4 times more slowly than real time. And this is working quite well. I'm using the optical flow because that's the best option. And it looks pretty smooth. There is still some glitching. I think there's actually possibly less glitching than there was in the full speed one, but it works. You can push things beyond the technology that you have. We could potentially push this even further. So yeah, so that's two Very straightforward ways, and pretty much the typical ways of producing slow motion video. None of them are necessarily better than the others. They are different. They have different aesthetics, different effects. There are times when I would want the very smooth slow motion. There'd be times when the jerky slow motion would be actually more appropriate because it gives a different feeling. But at the end of the day, you can only work with what you've got. And all of these are viable ways of making slow motion. So have fun with that. See you guys later.